Okay, we should be streaming now. So I'm going to go ahead and close that up. All right, everybody, welcome to another webinar in our MedTech Innovator Live series. I'm Paul Grand. I'm the CEO here at MedTech Innovator. For those of you who haven't been part of one of our webinars before, MedTech Innovator is an accelerator for the medtech industry. So that's diagnostics, digital health, and medical devices. We focus exclusively on companies in these webinars that are part of the MedTech Innovator cohort in terms of our discussions. So we'll be talking about topics that our companies that are part of the MedTech Innovator Accelerator program have submitted in advance. That's going to guide the discussion, but of course it will evolve as we go. This is a series, as I mentioned, of webinars that we do every week at the same time on Thursdays here in the US at 10:30 Pacific. So tune in if you're interested in learning about the latest trends and the latest happenings in the medtech industry and talking to some of the leaders in the industry, as we'll be doing today. So today's panel and today's discussion is to talk about strategic partnerships with manufacturers. A lot of the people who you'll meet through the MedTech Innovator Program are manufacturers. It's one of the things that is pretty unique about this particular program, and that we have the opportunity to work closely with a lot of the leaders in the industry. And you get a chance to learn what they're, how they think, and get to meet them kind of as people and not just as these anonymous entities that people think about and say, well, maybe someday I'll partner with one of those companies. We encourage you to talk to those people as early as possible and to get to know them. And this is one of those mechanisms to do that. So I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. We got a terrific panel. I'll start off by introducing Christos Monovoukas from Olympus, who's been a partner of ours for several years now. So Christos, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Olympus.
Thank you, Paul. And hello, everyone. I'm glad you joined us. I run globally the mergers and acquisitions function at Olympus Corporation. That includes not only medical, but also our scientific solutions business. I've been doing this for 6.5 years now at Olympus, and prior to that with Smith & Nephew on a similar role. Glad to be here to share some insights with you.
Thank you very much, Christos. Great to have you here. Next up, Kenny Tran with Asahi. So, Kenny.
Good morning, everyone. As I said, my name is Kenny Tran. I'm currently the Business Development Officer at the California-based subsidiary for Asahi. In my capacity, I work with licensing with universities and startups to license their emerging technologies into our portfolio. Previously, I was a development engineer for about 8 years, working on developing next-generation catheter systems. So my background is both in business development and engineering, which gives me a little bit, I guess, an edge in this space. So I'm happy to share any insight I have.
And located on a nice beach too, which is great.
So I'm trying to represent my California weather.
Very good. All right, thanks, Kenny. And then next we have Virginia Giddings from Edwards Lifesciences. Hello, Virginia.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I am with Edwards Lifesciences, located in Southern California. I head up their exploration function globally. I sit within advanced technology, and my team's role is to identify the next generation products for Edwards. I'm new to Edwards. I started in March. And while I'm new to Edwards, I'm not new to medtech. I've been in medtech for about 30 years in my career. I've been with Abbott, J&J, and most recently with Stryker in a variety of more early stage kind of either R&D leadership or business development leadership type roles. I'm an engineer by training. I have my PhD in mechanical engineering, so I sort of lead with the technical in a lot of ways, and looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to have a bunch of engineers on the call today, so we can get super technical if we need to. But no, that's great. Thank you very much, all three of you. So maybe before we get into some of the detailed questions, I can start off with something that Virginia brought up before when we were talking kind of just in general about, the environment and what's out there, and just the, of course, COVID remains, something that's in all of our minds. We're all sitting here in our homes or sheltering somewhere. I'm in an office, but it's just me for a reason. And I think a lot of people are always wondering, how has COVID affected things? So maybe to start off and ask that for all three of you, has COVID changed the function that you have in your job, and if so, how has it changed that? Are you still doing those university explorations, Kenny, and Virginia? Are you still doing what you do, and so on? So I'll start off with Kenny. Are you still interacting with universities and doing all the things you were talking about before?
Oh, absolutely. I have phone calls with university professors every day. The one difference that I don't actually have to travel to the lab. I don't have to physically look at it anymore, come and meet. So that kind of cuts down a lot on the airfare time. But yeah, we still have meetings. Personally, I find the Zoom meeting actually for me more productive than meeting in person, because with the Zoom meeting, I have a screen on the side that I'm taking notes in real time, and I'm kind of looking things up and talk to them in real time. So for me, it's more productive and more efficient than having the stress of going there, looking for parking, and having to sit there. And I don't write as fast as I type. So when I'm taking notes while I'm talking to the physicians and being able to look at stuff in the background, for me it's more efficient. But yeah, we're still talking universities. We're still making arrangement. I feel like I'm meeting a lot more now with the less travel. I make it up with more meetings, so I'm able to squeeze in more meetings. Yeah.
Good to hear. And how about you, Christos?
Two significant changes. One, organizationally, we are experiencing a little bit of a cash preservation mode. We're in a cash preservation, and that's understandable. We do see the end, the light at the end of the tunnel. So we started to move some of these projects that we were working on before towards the end of the year, which we believe will be the time when we come back. So that's one. The other is on the projects, the current projects that we're working on. The pandemic has really changed the way we are conducting due diligence, and so we can really visit the facilities and the sites that we want to do, perhaps an audit or some sort of a walk around. That has been significantly curtailed. So we do that with FaceTime and a lot of video conferencing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about doing things like seeing new technology? Are you able to still kind of remotely do that, or are some of those things still happening in person?
We still do that. There's still technologies coming our way in many more ways than before. So there's no stopping that. What we obviously cannot do is meet with the founding teams and the inventors and all that in person to get the feeling and the sort of the psychology out of the potential deal. As you know, teams are important in any venture, especially startups, and so we tend to miss that aspect of our diligence, and hopefully that will come back. I mean, it's okay to meet somebody virtually. It's another thing to shake their hands and crack a few jokes, understand the person, than just the value proposition of the business. So.
Yep, I agree with you completely.
And likewise for us, we're sort of busier than ever before in some ways. With meeting, with being able to do the video meetings, that's enabled us just to have sort of more touches with more entrepreneurs in a more sort of compressed time. And I think everyone's taking advantage of it. But to the point of what you were just asking, Paul, I think this does speak to, it's more important than ever that entrepreneurs have good visual ways to really illustrate their innovations, whether it's, and I've seen a lot, sort of the spectrum of, different kinds of videos are really helpful in explaining the procedures. If they have videos of, the actual procedure, if they have animations of that, that's very helpful. I mean, there's ways to even videotape within the clinical setting or the preclinical setting that can be very helpful. And I think those are are things that entrepreneurs need to really tap into. The other thing that's been interesting for us, and we're still moving sort of full speed ahead with diligence and all of that, but it's also that we're having more of an opportunity than ever to also work on the strategic piece of it, which is so important. And sometimes that can get, put to the side a bit as you focus on, going to conferences and all of that. But having the strategy really solidified, that's something that we've been spending a lot of time investing on recently.
Good. So following up, maybe kind of on that topic in general, let's talk about how people should engage with you. There's the typical times and the COVID times. So maybe we can start with, or maybe we'll just, if each of you could kind of address that topic is, how do you engage typically with startups in general, small companies, startups? How do your firm engage with them, and any particular advice and how they should approach you in the first place? So I'll start backwards with you, Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and there's no sort of one right answer. It's, I get contacts through LinkedIn, I get emails, I get referrals from friends and former colleagues and all that. So that's all effective. But, as I sit in sort of the shoes of an entrepreneur, I think, the first thing to really think about is which strategic do you approach, and which ones are going to be the most productive relationship for you to invest your time in. And for that, I think it's really understanding the strategy that these strategics have. And they're, it's actually all fairly transparent in a sense that, if you listen to earnings calls, if you listen to JP Morgan presentations, and it's all available online, you can get a really good sense for what the strategy is of a strategic. And really from that strategy and how they talk, the CEO talks about it, it's really the acquisition strategy follows from that. So I think, those, to be the most time efficient, productive about it, if you as a startup could really target those companies that are where you're going to be on strategy for them, that's going to be the best use of your time. And then, then it's like, I think LinkedIn and other social media are credible resources there to connect with and find the right person. And you might not find the right person with the first contact. So it's really working that network and looking for the right introductions to get to the right people in the organization.
And Virginia, following on that, do you feel like people do that homework generally, or are a lot of conversations ones where you're saying, yeah, that's completely not on our strategy?
Yeah, so I do. Yeah, I get a lot that are on strategy, but I get a lot that are off strategy, yeah. So I think that is important for entrepreneurs to really understand. They may have incredible ideas, and they might have a great value proposition. But they also need to make sense in the context of the strategics business. And, we look at, there's a lot of ways we could think about investing our dollars. There's organic, internal R&D, there's external, and there's a lot of incredible innovations that might sit within a space, but that doesn't mean that it's a good fit for us. So really, yeah, I think doing that homework can be really, really helpful. And it doesn't have to be like all online research, calling friends, colleagues, connections, asking those questions and trying to understand it. I think, it just becomes much more time efficient for everyone else if you can target the specific companies that would have that interest.
Thanks, Virginia. Any other tips, Christos, or things or just in general, maybe also tell us, some of the ways in which Olympus engages with small companies?
Sure, happy to do that. First, just a general comment. I think the best insight, the best advice I can give to entrepreneurs starting out, or even some that are already in this mode 2, 3, 4 years out, is to understand the ecosystem, right? Is to understand, the players in the industry, do a thorough analysis of who else is feeling the pain. I mean, if you're solving a problem in cardiology, let's take Edwards, for example, your bet is that they're thinking about it too, right? If you're solving a problem in orthopedics, I'm sure Smith and Nephew and Stryker are also thinking about it, or should be thinking about it. So I think understanding your role in that ecosystem is very important. And then when you do look at your exit strategy, I think each business plan should have something like that, at least consider it. Then strategics take a different role in that respect. Do you want to team up with them early, late? Do you want to build it and then they buy you expensively, or do you engage with them earlier and the exit is not as stellar? So those are some thoughts. Olympus, we believe we have, I guess, the means to evaluate early on technology, early stage technology. We have a superb research and development teams around the world that can actually do that and tell us exactly what we're looking at. I've been fascinated ever since I joined Olympus 6 years ago about that. And then we can entertain M&A at the largest, at the other end. So we teamed up with Meditate, for example, an Israeli company in the urology space. And we invested $20 million and took some commercial rights, including some equity. And we're working together with them for the next generation solution and cure of BPH. And there were some announcements lately. We're glad that we got clearance and we're beginning to see it in the market, a device called iTind. So that's one, I would say, big example of how we place a bet and then have a significant involvement and collaboration with the founding teams to commercialize the product. On the other side, we have made acquisitions, one in particular called ISM, Image Stream Medical, which is an integrator of OR services and products. And we will do some more later this year and the following years. So in a way, Olympus is doing everything possible, in my opinion, when it comes to corporate development to promote and really help startups, help Olympus, help our customers.
Great, thanks, Christos. And Kenny, same question for you. And again, any particular, you already mentioned like reaching out to universities and other ways that you find innovation. But just tell us, anything else in terms of partnering with Asahi Intecc, and then also, any particular tips on how people should approach you.
Sure. So currently in my capacity, I do more of looking than people coming to me at the moment. I actually go out there and I actively look for technologies that matches our portfolio. But some advice in talking to startups or universities when they're approaching us, essentially, if possible, they have a good business plan. And by good business plan, what I mean is like, whether or not their technology has synergy with our product, right? As a company, what are their core values? Do they have a plan of execution in terms of long term? It doesn't have to be robust, but you can have a great technology, but if you don't kind of like think ahead of time how you're going to execute on delivering the plan, then what good is technology if you can't execute, right? They really have to convey a unmet need. A lot of times with engineers, we'll develop something that's really fancy, and we think there's a problem for us to solve. But in reality, there really isn't that big of a market for it, or what we're trying to solve is a very small niche market. So like if you find that you have a very small niche market, then it's kind of a little harder for the investors to invest in you unless they're particularly looking for a niche market, right? For example, Asahi, for what projects I'm doing now, I'm not interested in a niche market. We want to know that we have a return on investment on it. So it's important to know that what you have serves an unmet market that is large enough that there could be a return on investment on it. Since we're in the med space, you really got to do a little bit of homework on the clinical and regulatory pathway. For example, for my project, I'm interested in 510K pathways, right? So if you come into me with a device that really needs a clinical PMA pathway with a full clinical trial, that might be outside my investment scope. So, I may not be interested in that. That conversation could be cut early, right? So that a little stuff like that you can Google easily, either through the FDA website or the clinical website. But being armed ahead of time with kind of like the clinical side of it, or even reimbursement, you can look up the reimbursement to see if there's a code for it, to see what you can get for your device, to see what kind of clinical pathway, what kind of regulatory pathway that would be needed. You can look up similar devices on the regulatory website to identify the regulatory pathway. So when you're armed with all this ahead of time, our first 1 or 2 meetings will be much more productive, allowing me to do, I guess, my assessment before kind of like moving to the next stage to continue conversations. Especially with this new Zoom schedule, I'm having meetings back to back. So, the more information that you arm with, then the more productive our meetings will be, and we'll be able to move to the next stage.
Great. Thanks, Kenny. So I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about, kind of process a little bit. So people approach, someone Googles you, or, Virginia, looks up Edwards Lifesciences, listens to a presentation from JP Morgan or something, wherever they find out about Edwards, and they reach out to you now. And, maybe they email you, however, LinkedIn you, however they get in touch with you, from that point, until the point at which, maybe you actually have some kind of a transaction or a partnership in some way. What's that process like, and kind of who drives it? Is that something that, you drive more? Is it something that you expect the startup to be driving, and they should be super persistent? Just kind of give us a sense of kind of what the process is like. Do you hand it off to teams? Do lots of people get engaged? What should someone expect when they're reaching out?
Yeah, I think number one is being clear on what the objective is, what you need out of the interaction, and typically, the way I've seen these work is it's not any one meeting or a few meetings. It's about developing a relationship over a longer term. So, I think you have to be clear on those expectations from the get-go. In terms of Edwards and how sort of where I sit in Edwards, I work on the very front end. So, my team, the exploration team, would be really engaged in developing the relationship with the startup. So if a startup approach me, that would, sort of depending on what their needs are at that point, if they're really at that point where they're looking for an investment and they're highly specific about it, then we would probably have a few discussions, not under an NDA. We would determine if there's sufficient interest there or not before we go into an NDA. So that would be, pretty thoughtful and deliberate, because NDAs are, they are a serious legal obligation for the organization. So we don't take those lightly. Then we would go into an NDA and do, typically we would really look at the business case, the market, understand, as Kenny was saying, being clear on the need, being clear on the population, what's the clinical strategy, what's the technology. So we would understand those. And that's sort of an initial screening of the company and the technology. We'd want to understand the team and get to know them. And then from there, once we move more into a transactional phase, we would work with the business development, our corporate business development, to be able then to advance through things like the terms and all of that, the financial considerations. So that's typically how that process would go. In the front end for our process, it's really like us being clear on the strategy from the beginning, that we understand the disease state, we understand the strategy in the disease state, and we already have a landscape of understanding what are the entrepreneurs in that space. So we already would have an understanding. And again, these relationships take place over time. So while we do have an internal process, I think the entrepreneurs really need to see this as, it's about building a relationship. It's about building trust and confidence, and over which can take time. It can happen more quickly, certainly if there's, sort of a driver there behind it. But typically these are longer term relationships over, 2 to 5 years it takes development and product development in med tech can take many, many years. And so these are relationships that are developed over time.
Thanks. Christos, anything you want to add to that?
Virginia pretty much covered the way I would answer the question. I think strategy is very important. So my team, we are embedded in these the business units. So we're structured around global business units, and so business development is represented in these business units at the highest level, meaning we are next to the general managers of these business units. These are $300 million businesses, right? So we are very much in sync with the strategy, and we can apply that filter quickly when we see something. I agree that relationships are important, and it takes time to build those. But you know, we also have this quick test with strategy. If it's on strategy, then we have the second phone call, right? And so we believe that the entrepreneurs themselves may have already decided, I guess, to come to Olympus and talk to us because they see the fit. So I always ask them, well, why did you come to us? We know, how do you see us working together? So that's a great way of starting the conversation. And depending on, I think Kenny mentioned that, depending on the needs, and Virginia as well, depending on the needs, then we take it to different, the request to different groups. If it is a co-development, for example, then BD will facilitate a project with the R&D, or if it's a pure equity investment or something else. So we are the first line of defense in a way, but I like to think of it as a first door that somebody would come looking for collaboration with Olympus. We welcome that. I mean, we have that door wide open, actually.
You know, let me follow up on something you just asked, or you mentioned co-development. So, you know, some people know what that means, other people don't. So how would you describe, you know, co-development? What might that look like in terms of relationship? Sure.
So let me. So the definition, I guess, for us is the company or the group. When I give you the example, I'll explain what I mean. Why I differentiate that. Has the technology, has perhaps the idea of doing something. Olympus has the market knowledge and the insights and the access to the market that can provide or better describe the need, the market and clinical need, and therefore the two sides of the coin can come together to create magic, and that's what we mean by co-development. In a particular case, so let me just use an example. Back in 2017, we struck a deal with a company in Canada called AI for GI. AI for GI was a consortium of 3 companies. That's why I mentioned the founding team, and the idea was gelling at the time. They got in touch with us. They asked us to collaborate on a AI algorithm for detection of polyps in the colon, which is a huge area of interest for us. And we had some idea of how to do it ourselves, but this was a super duper group, like I said, out of Canada, Montreal, the labs out there, University of Montreal. And we struck a deal where we would fund their research and their work. And then our marketing will provide knowledge of the market. The decisions about graphic interface, for example, I mean, that all fell on our shoulders because we knew how our customers were interfacing or potentially interface with a system like that. So we provided we did a discovery project with our R&D and gave that feedback to them. Obviously, the AI for GI was developing the algorithm, which they were experts on, and started testing it together and provide collaboration like that. What we got out of it, what Olympus got out of it, was the commercial rights. So we decided to, I guess, carve out certain clinical and sort of healthcare areas, and to use the algorithm, and we claim rights to those to commercialize it. So we are the commercial partner once the device is developed, the algorithm is developed.
And that was a consortia that you said, right? So that wasn't a, that had come together, it wasn't a particular, like a startup entity.
Correct. Well, at the time, there were 3 different organizations trying to get together to form one entity, which they eventually did. They called it IMAGIA, was one of the consortium names. But they just, I just wanted to highlight how early we got involved, right? We got involved when they were thinking about it. They had a prototype. We saw it at DDW, one of the major trade shows for gastroenterology, and we started talking to them, and that's how everything sort of gelled together.
Great, thank you for the example. That was really helpful. And Kenny, anything you want to add to that before we move on?
I think Crystal covers quite a bit. I think we can move on.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so so moving on then, one of the questions that everybody always asks is, when should I approach a potential, a strategic? And so I know everyone's got probably different answers to this, so we'll go quickly through those. But Kenny, you've already told us you're super early, right? You'll work with the academics.
Yeah. So I can speak to actually the earliest case I've worked with so far is a physician approached us with an idea, and he doesn't have a prototype, he doesn't have a patent, he doesn't have anything. All he has is an NDA with us. But because he's worked with us before on a previous device that was successful, and he started like 6 other companies before, we kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt that device might become something. And so we're working out a deal with him where the payments to him would be done in milestone payments. So we'll pay him something for considering us for exclusivity, right? And then we'll pay him additional milestones and work alongside him to develop the prototype, working prototype, right? Essentially, we're consulting him for his time, but we're calling it milestone payments. And then if our R&D team determines it to be promising, right, we'll fund the filing of the IP and whatnot. So like we'll consider a total milestone payment up to commercialization. We consider paying him based on the market assessment of this potential technology. So in this case, it's very extreme, but since we have such a good relationship with this physician, right, we take what he says seriously. So I think that's about as early as you can get. Is basically we're funding a napkin sketch idea. So that would be one extreme. And another example would be, of course, with universities. Universities typically have the product up to feasibility on the bench top, right? They don't have anything to be further, so then they'll engage us. And if we're interested in technology, we'll take over the development, the manufacturing, the patenting, everything associated with it. So that's kind of like I guess you could say pre-company spin out. And then the option of funding a company spin out for that university is obviously on the table too, which we'll have to kind of assess the market value. But essentially, the space I deal with is like pre-startup phase.
Got it. And Virginia, how about you in terms of when you really want to engage with a company? It's one thing to have a conversation and form a relationship, but at which point does a company have to have prototypes, evidence, etc.? Like what do you think is the ideal time to really be engaged?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is an ideal time per se. I mean, in terms of when we might activate to make an investment, there would be a set of criteria and considerations around that with strategic fit and, where is the company in terms of their preclinical, et cetera, their technology development. So, but I think in general, I'd say the earlier the better from an entrepreneur's perspective. The earlier they can engage, the better. And I know many entrepreneurs are concerned, and sort of rightly so, about like going too early. So I think things like having your IP strategy in place that can be really that provides you assurance and protection there. But I think the thing is that strategics have a lot of experience, and it's really deep. And that experience And they're often willing to share that experience as sort of free consulting. And that can be incredibly helpful to startups to make sure that they don't go down, a path that's not going to be fruitful for them. So I think from that perspective, get your IP locked up and then start building those relationships. And I would recommend starting to build it long before you might want, at that point where you have seed funding, you have other sources, angel investing, you don't want strategic investment at that point. It is not a bad idea to start interacting with strategics who have invested a lot of time going deep in a specific area, and they can often give you guidance. And it's sort of in all, we're all part of this larger innovation ecosystem. And if we can get to like great innovations to market with sort of the least amount of, dead ends and all that, it's time efficient, it's financially efficient. So I think most people I've worked with who are in similar roles as mine are willing to give out that kinds of advice and guidance. And, I've worked with so many different companies where they've invested a lot of time. And if they had spoken to me earlier, I might have been able to give them some input that could have shortened it. There's a company that I worked with, which was like an incredibly interesting technology, very novel. It moved a procedure from the surgical area to an interventional space. There was nothing like it. It was really unique. It had cool gadgetry and engineering and just like a very, very nice product concept and good thought behind it. But when we started digging into it, we recognized pretty early on the referral pathway of, it went from like a general physician, it went to like the neurologist, it went to the neurosurgeon, it went back to the general physician. So it was a very convoluted referral pathway, and sort of absent a good diagnostic in that particular space, there was no way for that company, even though they had an incredible concept, to be able to access that market size that they had initially predicted. So once we looked at it, we were able to give them that input, and it really changed the whole financial model for them. And it was something where if we had gotten into those discussions a little bit earlier, that I think we could have helped them out quite a lot. And what the kinds of information we would have been conveying to them is it's not proprietary information. So I think there's a lot that falls like not really in the proprietary space. It's just experience based, where we can, if you can approach a strategic, if you can form that relationship earlier before you need that financial contribution, there's still a lot of good guidance that you can get.
Yeah, it's really good feedback. I mean, that literally is the reason we started MedTech Innovator was to have that opportunity for strategics to work earlier with startups and to provide a nice framework for that, because it does seem to be something that people are apprehensive of. A lot of the startups think it's just too early. They want to stay stealthy or whatever it might be, or they're afraid someone's going to steal their idea, which is not all that easy to do as a practical matter. So anyways, I think it's really good advice.
Yeah, and I don't want to diminish that concern because I am saying get your IP locked up and know your story of your technology. However, many large companies, and this is how Edwards approaches it, they do keep their business development or their external, their group that works on external opportunities. They do deliberately keep them separate from their internal teams to avoid exactly that, the cross-contamination aspect of it. And, these are both, for us and for all companies, I think, having a strong organic R&D but also being able to access technologies from the outside, it's very important parts of our strategy. And so having a mechanism to deal with that such that we're not causing contamination between those two different aspects of our business is really critical.
And Paul, if I can just add to that, I understand the concern of IP theft, perhaps, or copying IP. I'm not diminishing that at all. Like Virginia said, get your IP straightened up, or get your patents and all that, or just the applications. But if you think about it, just for a second, larger organizations are not in the business of stealing ideas from startups, because then they can go and develop it their own. If they do that, they can afford to do that only once. then they're dead, right? Because nobody's going to approach them. Everybody's going to have that example in mind. So that should not be the concern. The concern should be what once you approach them with the wrong ask, because you are in the wrong timing, and you don't know the strategic point of view, then you may have closed that door without really knowing it. So I think doing your homework and approaching a strategic as early as possible is totally the right approach. It reminds me of when you are a kid, I guess. You work on something for dad, right? And you're doing it and you wait until it's perfect to show to dad or mom and say, here, look what I got. And it turns out to be the complete wrong homework or something, So that's not what we expect. We expect the collaboration. We actually enjoy that. And so as early as possible is a good suggestion.
I think it's just like, Christos, you just triggered the thought in me, like that, what we say about that, what the FDA will say is, approach the FDA early and often, and make them, your collaborative partner through as you develop your product. So I think that's great guidance. And I think it's the same kind of advice from strategics, early and often. Now, that doesn't mean we can always activate on, but it's about having a discussion, a dialogue, and developing that trust and relationship, and getting the guidance and coaching and mentoring along the way.
Right. And just to add to that, let's say somebody approaches me for a heart valve, right? Olympus is not in the cardiology space. I can just tell them, hey, go to Virginia, right? One phone call leads to the right person. So that's, I think we over answered that question.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, good answers from all of you for that. So, we covered IP. I don't think we need to talk too much more about IP, but that is definitely, it's good to know that there's a process for doing, non-confidential discussions, and then eventually moving to an NDA at the time at which that's appropriate. So that's the way that, I think it's good for everyone to hear that. So one of the other things I know that we hear a lot from people, because digital has become, the software side of things is, has been bubbling up and becoming extremely important for everyone. Christos, you mentioned before, getting involved with algorithm companies. So there was a question from one of our startups asking about, as a software platform, are there any particular considerations for approaching a strategic that's different than perhaps maybe for a device or anything? Is there a different unit, a different point of contact, or anything that resonates with any of you for that?
Just because the offering is software? Is that
yeah,
the
software. Is it still the same? Would it still be you and your unit who deals with that, or is there a different?
Correct. Yeah. So same point of contact. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. So then let's move on and let's talk a little bit about agreements. So Christos, you mentioned before co-development, and Kenny, you talked about sponsoring research and helping somebody with milestones and all that. There's a lot of questions from people that have to deal with what kind of rights are appropriate for those kinds of relationships. So I'd love to hear from maybe some examples from perhaps from each of you about what kinds of rights would be appropriate. Let's say it's I'm a startup, I've got some early prototype work, but I'm looking to partner with one of you, and that could be for the kinds of collaborations you were talking about earlier. Maybe it's to do some early clinical research or preclinical research to validate something, and you're kind enough to say we'd love to help you with that, and we've got all this great expertise and free consultation we can give you, but we want something in return for that. So what might be some of the kinds of rights that somebody can expect to here when they're talking to you, and what do you think is appropriate? So could start with you, Christos.
Sure. It's a very interesting question. I get that all the time because there is a sentiment out there that strategics should only be interested in, I guess, the sales or the selling commercialization of the device, of the product. And that's true. I mean, we want to augment our product portfolio. So that is the primary reason why we want to get into a collaboration with the startup or other companies. The question, though, is if we are going to put some money up front, if we are going to make some investments, time, money, etc., isn't it fair to get something out of it, right? So what we usually ask is commercial rights, exclusive distribution rights to XYZ market, right? Depending on the level of involvement. So if it's an equity investment of 1% of the raise or 1% of the company, perhaps we wouldn't be so demanding. But if it's 20, 30% of the company, then yes, we want to make sure that our investment results in a product that we can sell for a long time. So that's the balance there. Within the structure of the agreement, then we would probably ask for right of first refusal for the change of ownership of the company, meaning we would like to buy the company, would like to get first dibs, or first right of negotiation, or the variation of that depending on your negotiating skills. And then again, based on the level of investment, I'm talking about a scenario where we actually participate in an equity raise, then maybe a board seat or an observer seat. So those are the major elements that we were looking for.
And just quickly, between the difference between right of negotiation and a right of first refusal.
Another excellent question, and that we have to be careful here. Everybody has to be careful with the definition. Right of first refusal means that if I decide, if you give me that right as a startup company, then you can go and get another bid, or maybe somebody solicited an unsolicited bid, and you have an offer on the table. But the moment I offer you a little bit more, right, a better offer, you are obligated to take that. You're obligated to my deal, versus right of first negotiation, which is, hey, I got an offer from your competitor. What would you like to do? Okay, let's start negotiating. Thank you for letting me know. But we're not, you're not obligated to take the offer.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Christos, for shedding some light on that. Virginia, any other things you want to add?
I was just going to say, no, I think Christos covered that well. I think the thing too, there's a lot of different ways to structure these deals, and I've seen them structured many, many different ways. So there's no sort of standard. But the thing that we look for is that when Christos or Kenny or I go up through our executive leadership team, we need to have a business case there for this investment and why it makes sense for the organization. And so with any of those structures, we would need to be able to make that case. If it's co-development, it's very, very common that if co-development, if you're working on it together and if you're strategic, that you would have ownership of the IP rights. So co-development is, you're in it together. So there's often an expectation that you'll own that tangible asset coming out of it, being the IP. If it's, a strategic investment, that's different. Then it's about owning, part of the company at that point. So I think, but there's a lot of different ways, and it's all negotiable, and it's dependent on the need of the various partners involved.
Thanks, Virginia. And Kenny, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think Virginia hit on something really, really important about how we eventually have to present to management about the business proposal. So in that sense, I guess when talking to us, you kind of have to think of us as being on your team. So like, you have to really, share with us and talk to us and be intimate with us, so that at the end of the day, whether or not this deals go through is based on how much information you give me and how much I can use to have a business case toward the executive management team, right? Like, you're not talking to executive management directly. I'm on your team. I'm representing you when I'm presenting the case. So to boil back to kind of like your original question about structures, like I said, I work more with on the licensing side. So when I deal with universities or even physicians, one of the things that we need to establish up front is that, is there expectations on the milestone payments? With licensing, ultimately, we're going to take over the manufacturing and the development. You've already gone through feasibility. That's why we're interested. But ultimately, we're going to bring it through the commercialization process. So with that, you need to be established, okay, as the inventor or the person who owns the IP, do you expect milestone payments throughout this development cycle? Do you expect, a percentage of the upfront royalties because you anticipate this to be a really big market? And then another thing is to consider is, what kind of royalty do you expect? Those are kind of terms that, we probably don't have an upfront answer yet, but it's a good idea to have a starting point so that we can, negotiate over that. Some other things to consider is that, let's say you want to license the technology, but you feel that there's a very broad use for it, right? You feel, for example, you feel that you can use this device for the neurovascular and the peripheral and the abdominal space, right? So you may have two companies that's looking at you. So you say, okay, you want to license to us for maybe the neurovascular only, and we say, well, we want the neurovascular and the peripheral, right? So maybe you can negotiate based on indication, right, or the application of your technology. Or we may say, we think your technology is good enough that we want all of it, right? We want to have total exclusivity over this device. So those are some things that you need to consider ahead of time, based on how many people is looking at your company. Maybe you can divvy it out to for different applications. Of course, to get to that point, you have to be like kind of a little bit further along, done quite a bit of your homework to understand what the landscape there is. So in summary, the agreement consists of various milestone point payment points, duration. How long do you expect this development cycle to take? Because you're taking an opportunity cost. If we tell you it's going to take us 5 years to develop it, right? You kind of have to think, well, that means you're losing the opportunity cost of 5 years on potential future royalties. So you kind of have to look at the company that you're working with and what they anticipate as a development period, what the projection is in terms of what you could be making. All those things you have to kind of think ahead of time.
Great. Thanks, Kenny. Thanks all of you
Hey,
for
Paul,
yeah, Christos, please go ahead.
I have a question in my inbox here. I don't know, this is the first time I'm using the medium. Should I answer it by typing? And I mean, shall I answer it for this particular individual, or
someone who's chatting with you directly, or is it in the Q&A box?
I think it's chatting with me directly.
You can, well, we're going to have an opportunity to do Q&A with the companies in the last 30 minutes. So you can either just quickly answer the question if it's that kind of a question, or you can save it and we can talk about it out loud after we stop the recording. So
Okay.
Up to you. So for the last, 5-6 minutes that we have right now, let's talk about a couple of, of maybe some of the pitfalls and things that that you would have, Virginia, you did a good job before of kind of outlining some of the, the fact that, oh, I wish I'd had a chance to talk to these guys a lot earlier. What are some, some of the things that, cause a relationship to go bad, or that, that have just soured you in terms of, dealing with a company, whatever it might be, any kind of pitfalls, anything that you can give some guidance to people that would help them in better collaborating. Virginia, you mentioned trust, building trust, that's super important. How does a company do that? So again, just in the last 5 minutes or so, let's talk a little bit about kind of some of the tips for how, what would make a good interaction with companies. So maybe I'll start with Virginia on that.
Yeah, I actually, I'm thinking of, as you were saying that, I was thinking about like what has gone really, really wrong. I mean, I just haven't seen a relationship sour. I do think that there's some patience that's needed sort of on both parts to invest in developing that relationship. And where I've seen deals be like difficult to, where they've reached difficulties has been when it comes to that question of having a sort of a mutual understanding of the value of the technology, the license, whatever. That's where I've seen things really break down and be able to not be resolved. And again, goes back to we have to make a business case for whatever kinds of investments we need to make. I think where I've seen things be really challenging in terms of acquisitions has been situations where late clinical stage acquisitions. I won't name names because I'm, sort of, I've been with a number of, I've been with J&J, Abbott, Stryker, et cetera. And but where companies have not followed the guidance of the FDA, I've seen that on a number of occasions where there was feedback there from the FDA and they chose to take their clinicals a different direction. That just can create a lot of challenges down the line. And then the other aspect that's just been incredibly challenging from a strategic perspective has been with acquisitions and with the quality systems considerations and how you integrate those systems and design controls and compliance to design controls. I know that's sort of not the exciting, sort of sexy part of investment. It's the nuts and bolts of how you do things in medical devices. So I think, that aspect of making sure you have a good compliance strategy is really critical. And, having the great technology story and the unmet need is absolutely critical, but then doing the robust work, either getting good consultants in or hiring strong people on design controls to make sure that you don't have a compliance exposure there, because once you get to the integration stage, that can really trip you up with integrating into a large company.
Great, thanks, Virginia, for that. Kenny, any advice from you?
Sure. Some of the things I've come across is that when a startup approaches us and not going sour, because like Virginia says, it's not really a lot of things that go sour. We're all in it with our best interest. But I can speak to why we would say no to a deal, right, or would not move forward. Some reasons would be, they have a novel idea, but the market is not big enough, right? That may sound simple to say at first, but where that breaks down is that it's based on their assumptions when they estimate the market, right? A lot of times, you think that it's a team of engineers, they may not have a business background. So in their assumptions, when estimating the market, they may overestimate the market. And then when our business team come in and we evaluate the market, we're like, well, we don't think so. So then we have a misalignment of what we believe the potential market value to be, and the deal doesn't go forward, right? And they may be like, well, we think the market's big enough, right? Other things, they may not be paying attention to business trends. Like, for example, today or within the last few years, they might have developed a certain technology, right? At that time, the technology may be good, but then there might be a trend that the companies are moving away from that technology. So then now you have a device that's like it's not going to be selling in a couple of years. So because they didn't kind of pay attention to the trends, they weren't able to pivot, and then we're not interested in the technology due to future what we believe to be future trend. Another one would be like they may have a poor business plan, right? Or like they haven't thought of all of the details. They haven't thought about the regulatory pathway, the clinical pathway. They haven't thought about, as a startup, they may not have the distribution channel yet, but the partners that they have partnered up with, have they have an idea of where the distribution channel is going to come from, what kind of resources they can partner up with for a future, right? Have they thought about the reimbursement, right? If you don't have a reimbursement, you don't have money. You can't have a product without reimbursement, right? They haven't conveyed the technical challenges. I mean, it's a new product. There obviously is a technical challenge in developing it, but they won't convey, or they're kind of hiding about it. So that kind of brings up the question of trust, right? They say, oh, it's perfect. We can make it. We can make it. Well, what are your challenges? Oh, we don't know yet, but we can make it, right? Those type of discussions often comes up with physicians. There's a technically meet unmet need. The other one would be, the technology might be very early stage, and they don't have a way of making, or they don't have a clear understanding of how it can be made. So that usually is kind of like a no-go right away. Yeah, so.
That's great. Thanks, Kenny. Good
Yep.
tip. Christos, you get the final word on this.
I agree with all the comments, specifically especially the one about trust that Virginia mentioned. I think conversations. Well, I come from a school of thought here of that business is all about people. It's a people relationships, and so trust is very important. So in a case where a startup or a small company comes to me and says, "You're my first call because I believe Olympus is the perfect partner for us," and then I find out that you went to my competitor before or after I was able to make a determination. That is not that's not very appreciated, and for the simple reason. I mean, if you've done your homework, then you know that my competitors would be interested. So I'm okay with that. Just tell me so. There's no shame on doing that. It's just, as a matter of fact, it may work to your advantage because then all of a sudden I feel like I'm in a virtual competition. But not trying to butter somebody up because you want that deal very much. It's not the way to start a conversation. So that would be my one small comment. Yeah.
That's a really good one. All right. Well, we're at the hour, so that means we're at the end of the first portion of this, the live portion on YouTube. So I want to thank all the panelists. You guys are terrific, and really appreciate your thoughtful answers. So thanks for that. Also, want to just ask, just in general, I think you guys have all set this up already pretty much, but people you're all open to getting, cold calls, right? So people can reach out to you and find you directly. That's good for you.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, I'm seeing nodding heads from everybody. Great, thank you. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up the live portion of this, or at least the YouTube portion. So thanks everyone who is tuning in on YouTube Live. We're going to move to a private Q&A now, just with the MedTech Innovator cohort. But thank you everyone who tuned in on YouTube. Please share this information with your friends, medtechinnovator.org/live. That's where you can find these. So it's been great to have you guys tuning in for this. For some of the people who are entering questions on the YouTube chat, somebody asked if we're going to post the Q&A on the website. The recording that we do, or excuse me, the Q&A that we do that is not part of the broadcast will not be posted because those are generally nuanced questions that we want to just keep private so the people have the ability to do that without it being recorded. But thanks for asking that question. And if you're part of MedTech Innovator, you'll be able to do it yourself next time around. With that, again, thanks everyone who tuned in. We do this every Thursday, same time, 10:30 Pacific. Looking forward to seeing you. The full schedule for our upcoming webinars is posted on medtechinnovator.org/live. So thank you everyone who tuned in, and we will see you soon. Everyone else still stay on board